Good morning. You're very welcome to this morning's Euractiv debate. We are talking about responsible sourcing and the case for batteries. Now, we know very well that over the last decade, responsible sourcing has become a huge issue. Indeed, responsibility for the green transition overall has become a very key factor of the sorts of policy proposals we're seeing coming out of the EU Commission. The case for batteries, however, is one of particular interest because of the minerals we're using to create them and because of their growing necessity in our very much connected lives. So we're going to talk all about that today, particularly about what sort of responsibilities we have as industry, as citizens, as policymakers. And we have a great panel of experts to talk to us about that. We're going to be, of course, looking in detail at the proposal for a regulation concerning batteries and waste batteries. So the entire life cycle of the battery is going to be looked at. So join me to talk about that. I am very pleased to welcome from the European Commission and DG Grow, the Head of Unit for Green and Circular Economy, Stefano Soro. We also have Alex Keynes, the Manager of the Clean Vehicles, Transport and Environment. We have Thomas Becker, Vice President of Sustainability and Mobility Strategy from BMW Group. Francesco Gattiaglio is the Director of EU Affairs at Eurobat. And last but by no means least, Mark Mistry is Senior Manager of Public Policy at the Nickel Institute, one of our supporters today and sponsor of the event. So thank you, gentlemen, all very much indeed for joining me. We will also be bringing in a representative from the European Parliament to join our discussion as well. But first, Stefano, let me start with you. Give us an opening comment and let me know why you think it's so timely and so important that we're talking about this today.
Thank you very much. Good morning to the other panelists. Good morning to you and good morning to the audience. Well, batteries are an excellent example where environmental issues and competitiveness issues work hand in hand. Europe's rapidly emerging battery value chain, with the European Battery Alliance and so on and so forth, is of strategic importance for Europe's economy and will help drive a green recovery. We have seen the Fit for 55 package. We have seen that it's clear to everyone that we need to decarbonize energy and we need a massive increase in the amount of electricity over the next 9 years, at least, for the first stage of our climate goals. And they are very important to drive this green recovery. The proposal that we're going to discuss this morning, the proposal for a batteries regulation of the European Commission, which has a significant number of provisions on responsible sourcing, is a sort of prototype or trailblazer, if you wish, for a new way of regulating products on a life cycle basis, using the internal market regulatory framework to promote sustainability and achieve the European Green Deal objectives. And I'm saying a trailblazer because we already have in the pipeline, in the regulatory pipeline of the Commission, a sustainable product initiative which will use the same life cycle philosophy with the same attention to due diligence and responsible sourcing as the batteries regulation for a wide number of products. We all know, and you said it just in the introduction, that batteries are a clear example where responsible sourcing is paramount. By the way, responsible sourcing and circularity were the main concerns expressed by civil society organizations in the open public consultation that preceded the adoption by the Commission of the proposal. More than half of the global demand for cobalt and lithium, it's actually 50% more or less for cobalt and 60% for lithium, as well as 8%, almost 10% now of natural graphite, and going more or less in the same direction. It was 6% a couple of years ago for nickel, are used for the production of battery. And this is not going to go down in the foreseeable future. Well, on the contrary. Only few countries supply those materials, and in some cases, low standards of governance may exacerbate environmental and social issues. In particular, for cobalt mining, I mean, I'm sort of quoting off the cuff from a paper written by our colleagues in the Joint Research Center of the Commission, which says that, cobalt mining is, in some areas of the world, is linked to human rights abuses, child labor, and life-threatening working conditions. So, I mean, it's obvious that in regulating the sustainability of batteries, responsible sourcing is bound to play a significant role. Today, there are already some voluntary due diligence schemes. They are a great thing, but they would not ensure that all economic operators, as we call them in regulatory speak, all businesses producing or being involved in the batteries value chain, abide by the same set of rules, have a level playing field. So we decided to propose regulation for this based on existing best practices, OECD guidelines, and with third-party verification. So in our proposal, we have included these requirements. They are very clear. They focus on the most important minerals used in batteries. We've been asked often, why haven't you included copper or lead? Because they represent only a negligible part of the global consumption of copper and lead. For copper, is 0.1% more or less. It would be completely pointless to include copper among the minerals covered by the sustainable sourcing, responsible sourcing requirements of the regulation. And if we did, we would not make a difference, and there would probably be a substitution effect. So we also decided to focus on large batteries, electric vehicle batteries, and larger storage, electricity storage batteries, because these cover the vast totality of the market, and especially of the growth in the battery market. So we want to have an impact while at the same time having a proportionate approach to the issue. This is my opening statement. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stefano, very, very much indeed for setting that out. I did mention we would be joined by a representative from the European Parliament, so I'm delighted to welcome from the IMCO committee, Antonius Manders, who is the rapporteur for the opinion on the new batteries regulation. Antonius, thank you so much for joining us today. Give us your perspective. You've been working on this very closely.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me. I think we can use the battery regulation, and I regretted that ENVI is focusing too much on environmental issues and not on, let's say, a strategic way of thinking for our new industry, because I think the batteries will be the oil for the next generation. So very important to our economy, but also very important for our society, how they can proceed. Of course, I can elaborate on the details of the regulation, but I think it's better to start with my overall view. I think in the past, the last 30 years, we have focused too much on the old-fashioned way of thinking of economy, namely making money, profits, and no cost for environmental damage, no cost for CO2. And I think we should change that. That means that we have to change the mindset of the people, but also the mindset of the CEOs of big companies. Because if we only focus on profit, for example, like Apple did with the universal charger, then we never will find our goals, and it is necessary to meet these goals on let's say, the Europe 55 and all kinds of these things. If we want to achieve the Green Deal, and I really support the goal, then we need another way. Then we need a change in the mindset of the people, and also in the mindset of well, the governments in the world. I think that it is possible to introduce with the battery regulation a new way of thinking, that we can have a new industrial strategy, not only focus on the cost price, because then we will lose, of course, from Asia. I think we should focus on a holistic approach, an integral approach, that we say design, production, use, and recycling. So it's a circular economy. For that reason, for example, I want to introduce a deposit system to get back 100% of all batteries, or at least 99%. I think it's necessary to have an export ban of waste batteries outside the EU for two reasons. That we do not pollute the environment in India or in Africa or what else, but that we are sure that the raw materials can be recycled within Europe, so that we keep our raw materials within Europe. And then I think we should invest a lot in trying to develop batteries, raw materials of which batteries are made, that we can produce them of European raw materials, so that we're not dependent. I think at the end, the due diligence, the social circumstances, and the environmental conditions should be much higher than the global standards as they are now, so that we can use the leverage of the internal market to become a leading industry, one. Secondly, that we can export our values and our European values to other parts in the world. If we do that, then we keep the internal market open for companies from outside the EU, but they have to comply with the European standards. And if that is the case, then I think we create a level playing field. There is no level playing field at the moment in the world. And why? Because we are only focusing on profits. And if we do that, then we will lose. Then in 25 years, we will be a museum in Europe, because now we still have a little bit money to spend, and we are a little bit richer still than Asia or other parts in the world. But there will be an end in our money materials. And so we need this transition time to create a Green Deal and use the leverage of the internal market and make the European battery industry completely independent from other parts in the world, so that we then have to lead the world-leading battery industry for cells, but also for the uses. And I think, for example, that electric vehicles, the batteries in electric vehicles, should not only use to transport people from A to B, because 95% of the time the car is standstill in the streets and parked. And I think we should focus on the interoperability of the batteries of cars, so that we can heat our house, that we can light in our house during the nights, etc., etc. This is the first part that I want to say. I hope that we can change the mindset of the European people and entrepreneurs too. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Antonio. It's a very passionate statement there. We are going to go next to Alex Keynes, and so we're going to talk about some of those use cases, because we can't decouple them from what we need the batteries for. So Alex, give me your perspective, please.
Thanks, and thanks very much for having me for this very timely discussion. So I don't want to spend too much time on what we already know. So I think there's a transition happening, a necessary transition happening to electric vehicles in the energy system as well. As the Commission outlined, we obviously need many more batteries for this, and therefore we would need a lot more of the metals such as nickel and lithium in the 2020s before ultimately recycling can play a bigger role. So for us, and I think for most people here, it's really important that this transition to climate neutral EU cannot come at the expense of environmental damage and obviously human rights abuses in other parts of the world, namely the global south. Therefore, clearly I think we're all on the same page here that mining practices need to improve and become more sustainable and ethical. And as MEP Manders said, we need to be able to export our values. And I think this is a really timely proposal from the Commission, and a really important step in the right direction. Obviously we're going to see a lot more material sourcing taking off over the next few years because of this transition. However, despite the fact we very much welcome this proposal from the Commission, the overall proposal on the battery regulation and specifically the due diligence regime, we believe there are some key elements missing from the proposal. I'll quickly outline some of these, and please do let me know if I'm going over time. So firstly, as the representative from the Commission mentioned, the proposed basis for company due diligence is the so-called OECD Due Diligence Guidance. The full name, I think, was mentioned in the advert for the event, the OECD Guidance for Responsible Supply Chains for Minerals of Conflict Affected and High-Risk Areas. So the problem with this is that it only looks at harm in the context of conflict. And therefore would not include, for example, raw materials originating from the South American lithium triangle, Argentina, Bolivia, Chile, and only addresses risks of gross human rights abuses, so things like torture and child labor. Instead, we think, in addition to this, companies must base their due diligence on the UN guiding principles on business and human rights, and additionally, the OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises. These two instruments together cover all human rights violations, and including, let's say, less gross violations, issues around land, labor, and water rights as well. Just a small change required by policymakers would really help kind of expand the scope and make sure that we don't miss any issues that might arise. There are also, key battery metals that we think are missing. Copper was mentioned, so I think I'll mention this as well. It's true that although battery demand for copper represents a much smaller part of overall demand, it is a key battery metal used in the cell anode and also the casing, and will only obviously go up as demand for batteries goes up. The key reason we think it needs to be in the regulation is that copper and cobalt are often mined together. And when mined as a byproduct of copper mining, we don't want cobalt to be able to, let's say, escape due diligence requirements through a loophole in the regulations. As I said, both are mined together. Iron as well, we think should be in. Iron used in LFP batteries, which are set to play a much bigger role for electric vehicles going forward than we anticipated. Companies like Tesla, CATL and VW have made announcements recently on this. As well as aluminium or bauxite, which is also a key battery metal used in the cell level and the casing. All three of these metals too have examples of environmental and human rights abuses or human rights abuses. For example, the 2019 mine disaster in Brazil, an iron mine killing 270 workers due to a mine tailings collapse, due to basically improper maintenance, auditing, and lack of due diligence. So, we think that these metals do need to be added. Final point in my intro remarks, I think, the proposal is a good start on human rights issues. However, on environmental due diligence, we think there are also some key points missing. The environmental risks outlined in the annex are currently, we think, too vague. For example, water being a good example, defined as it currently is as just water. This, we don't think, captures issues such as water contamination, access to water, and water usage and depletion. For example, it's very important that local communities have access to secure water. And the example of lithium extraction from brines in the Atacama Desert is a very good example of why these issues should be better defined, we think, in the regulation. I will leave it there for the intro remarks, and happy to elaborate a bit more later.
Thank you, Alex. Yes, you've raised a lot of issues there, but all of which we will try and tackle in a bit more detail following our next couple of opening statements. Thomas, let me turn to you next. Tell me what BMW Group is doing in this area.
Well, I think our activities in order to ensure the full integrity of our electric vehicles is threefold. First of all, it's about human rights and environmental standards. Secondly, about the climate footprint, and thirdly, about resource consumption. So if we start with the first, it all starts with looking into which materials we use in the first place. So our electric engines, for example, the very vast majority of them does not contain any rare earth in order, for example, to minimize risks in the sourcing of those materials. Secondly, if you look at cobalt, for example, we have decided very clearly not to source from the Democratic Republic of Congo, because we source lithium and cobalt directly as BMW and then provide these volumes to our suppliers. So we source directly from Australia and Morocco in order to make sure that the human rights abuses that are discussed with a view to Congo do not happen in our supply chain. At the same time, we work with the German Environmental and Development Authority, with the GIZ, in order to look into what would need to happen in order to have a more sustainable supply chain in Africa. On lithium, prior to considering sourcing, we have issued a comprehensive study together with 2 universities. What are the requirements for a responsible sourcing of lithium in South America? So turning to CO2, if you would not do anything against it, the CO2 footprint of a battery electric vehicle is about twice the one of an internal combustion engine. In order to make sure that it actually is lower than today's average cars by 2030, we are really taking ambitious steps with our suppliers in order to bring the supply chain impact down. So all our battery cell suppliers, be they from China, be they from Korea, be they from Europe, have signed up to the obligation to exclusively use renewable energies when supplying BMW with their products. So this will have a first significant impact on the life cycle of our vehicles, without, by the way, being forced by the legislator to do that. Another aspect, and this is closely linked to CO2, as you know, is thirdly, reducing the need for primary resources, because it brings down the CO2 footprint significantly, depending on the materials, to up to 75%, if you look at the case of aluminum, for example. So we strongly support, therefore, the proposal launched by the European Commission to establish a reliable circular regime for batteries. But very clearly, this is a long effort, where we are just at the start, where we will not see big volumes of material coming back out of automotive batteries in the next years. We will also see shifts in markets. CO2 pricing, the future of several other pieces of European legislation, will impact on the relationship between the prices of primary and secondary materials, and rightly so. So from my point of view, apart from the fact that we support the objectives of having significant recycled shares in the future, with that also procedurally a different approach of institutions and the various parts of industry, in order to really keep track of what is happening in terms of battery technology, what is happening on the markets, what is happening in terms of material availability, etc. So I think, and with that, I would conclude that new formats and new ways of dealing with one another on this topic is needed as we are entering new issues that are not properly being dealt with, I think, with just conventional legislation as we know it. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. Francesco, let me turn now to you. Give us your opening thoughts, your statements, your viewpoints, because we've heard from quite differing perspectives already. So please mix it up a bit more.
Indeed, very interesting discussion so far, and a lot of important elements. From our side, from the side of the battery manufacturers, first of all, we absolutely agree that a batteries regulation was necessary, given the incredible importance of batteries in the transition towards a green economy. As we were saying, batteries are the new oil, so they will really power the green transition, and it is important to source materials responsibly. Also because at the end of the day, we will be able to reuse the materials. We will be able to recycle batteries and use those materials to produce new batteries. But given the growth in battery sales that we are seeing and that we will see in the coming years, we cannot really expect that the share of recycled material will play a big role in manufacturing new batteries, at least for a few years. Therefore, the sourcing of raw materials is of incredible importance to promote sustainability. At the end of the day, we totally support the objective of having green batteries made in Europe and to have competitiveness through sustainability, because we truly believe that sustainability in all its declinations, so being carbon footprint over sustainable sourcing of raw materials or ambitious recycling targets, are necessary and are a defining and competitive factor for the European companies, because we are better than the rest of the world when it comes to sustainability, recycling, worker protections, and so on. On the due diligence aspects included in the batteries regulation, we tend to believe that the Commission actually put on the table a very good proposal. The impact assessment recognized the fact that the industry is already doing a lot in terms of due diligence. We already listened to a few examples just a few minutes ago. So there are a lot of voluntary agreements already put in place by the industry and by the European industry in particular. But of course, we agree on the fact that it's better to regulate these so that all actors in the value chain and all competitors also will have to comply with the same strict standards. If we look at the proposal, though, we do have a few elements that we would like to mention. First of all, the timeline, because we only have 1 year to implement the new requirements after the regulation will be approved. And we believe that this is not enough because, of course, the due diligence policies will have to be implemented, but also the results will have to be verified by third-party assessment bodies, and this entire system of checks will have to be established at national level. Therefore, we do not think that 1 year is enough to have all this done. Then we have a few concerns regarding the coherence with the Sustainable Corporate Governance Initiative, which will be proposed quite soon by the Commission, and which will have to ensure a level playing field, because we believe that products competing with batteries will have to comply with the same strict due diligence obligation. And finally, we believe that it is extremely important to ensure proportionality and have fact-based regulation. So we saw several calls to extend the scope to other applications or to other methods, but we believe that the impact assessment did a good job in assessing which methods need to be there and which applications need to be in the scope. At the end of the day, it is not a matter of being ambitious or not ambitious, but the point is to have a regulation which is productive and cost effective. And we believe that the current scope works quite well. In general, as I was saying, we believe it's a very positive initiative, and this is something that the battery industry totally supports. So looking forward to a good discussion also in the next minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Francesco, very much indeed. Mark, you're from the Nickel Institute, sponsors of today's event. So obviously you have a real feeling that now is the time to talk about this issue.
Yes, indeed. I have the feeling that there's a need to talk about this topic. First of all, many thanks for setting up this exchange and the other panelists for joining. I think the first point I would like to make is we heard right now in the introductory statements that raw material supply is of global nature. But I think it is important not to forget that we still have world-class installations when it comes to nickel production in Europe. So I was just noting down a few countries like Finland, France, Belgium, Norway, the United Kingdom, where we have nickel producers, world-class nickel producers being located. And with Umicore here in Belgium, also one of the top companies when it comes to the recycling of nickel and other raw materials, other metals which are recycling from the batteries value chain. And as nickel industry, we play here a critical role as we are at the begin as well as at the end of the battery value chain. So we are providing the raw materials, but we also look forward and we are preparing ourselves for getting the materials back once they leave the use phase. When it comes to the topic of the day, responsible sourcing, there's a clear message that I would like to leave, and that's actually our member companies are committed. So we are here to clearly state that we are committed to responsible sourcing, and we are also supporting the inclusion of responsible sourcing into the proposed EU battery regulation. It's often enough misunderstood, but in the case of our member companies, we see this not as a burden, but as an opportunity to demonstrate that we are ready to identify and to address environmental, social, and governance risks, as it allows companies to also demonstrate their performance and that they are committed to the targets which are set, for example, also in the European Green Deal. And when you look into the activities in which we are involved, I think that is also clearly showing how committed we are. There are regulatory initiatives like, for example, proposed EU battery regulation. We see trading platforms looking into responsible sourcing. There are public-private partnerships like the Global Battery Alliance in which we are involved, but also industry-driven initiatives such as, for example, Drive Sustainability or Responsible Steel, where this topic is actually picked up and where we are engaged. And there's one very nice example where we can demonstrate that we are actually committed, that we are working on this, and that's the joint due diligence standard, which we actually developed together with the colleagues from the copper industry, from the zinc industry, the lead industry, and the Responsible Minerals Initiative. It took us 12 months to develop this document. It's right now undergoing a review process of the OECD to ensure that we are compliant with the OECD due diligence requirements. There are right now 3 points I would like to leave when it comes to the proposed EU battery regulation, but also the Sustainable Products Initiative and Sustainable Corporate Governance. And that's the first one is a point that Francesco already mentioned. We have to acknowledge that this is a very complex matter. When we talk about ESG risks, we are talking about a list of roughly 32 items. And looking into these risks, tailoring them to your specific raw materials industry and its characteristics is, of course, time demanding. And Francesco rightly pointed out that the one thing is to actually develop such a standard. The other thing is to leave the companies sufficient time to have the auditors coming over and to check. And the 12 months which are currently under discussion are simply not feasible for our industry. So a clear plea towards especially the European Parliament, but also the Commission, give us the time to actually properly implement a standard and to allow the companies to actually demonstrate that they comply with the requirements. The other point I would like to mention is that we observe with concern that we have right now a discussion taking place under batteries where proposals are made to extend the scope, to include this and that. For us, it is important that we have a coherent and consistent regulatory framework. A worst case would be that we have for each and every value chain in which nickel goes, different requirements. That is actually going to lead to inefficiencies. It's confusion. It's resulting in confusion.